Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Surah Hud, chapter 11, and we will cover verses 9 to 16 today. Recipe for success, Sabr plus Saleh. These are the two, this is covered in one verse, so I took this subtitle from there. These are the references, and this is our contact in case there is a query or question regarding this presentation. Recap verses 1 to 8. The Quran contains all that is required for guidance for man in this physical life. The verses are presented and explained in such a way that these clearly outline the permanent values which remain immutable for all times. When we say clearly outline the permanent values, that means we have to go through it and understand these permanent values in the context in which these are explained. By obeying what is given in the Quran, we become eligible for protection and security via the laws of Allah, and our sustenance becomes balanced. This is as per the law of Allah, and this state continues as long as we are in congruence with the permanent values of the Quran. Understanding the functioning of the law of requital holds the key to understanding scaling in the human world. Because when we do deeds, then these deeds point to us that what kind of a value they are carrying in case we understand the Quran and utilize it properly and apply these to these scales. We should watch out for the issues arising from the dual personality, as this creates an imbalance in our psyche which becomes a hindrance to development of the self. Quran puts a lot of emphasis on our psyche and says that there should be no difference between what we say and what we do. Because if there is a difference between what we say and what we do, then this points to dual personality, and a dual personality cannot carry out all the functions which are given in the Quran. So such a personality is a hindrance towards the establishment of the Deen. So that is what Quran says, that try to deal with these issues so that there is no cognitive dissonance within each one of us. Allah has provided sustenance for every living thing on earth, and the equitable distribution of these means of sustenance is the responsibility of human beings. The Quran provides guidance in this respect. Human life on this earth is the first part of the life of the self, and this stage will hand us over to the next stage of our life called the life of the hereafter. Now we go to the first two set of verses, psychology of egotism. وَلَئِنْ أَذَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنَّا رَحْمَةً ثُمَّ نَزَعْنَاهَا مِنْهُ إِنَّهُ لَيَئُوسٌ كَفُورٌ وَلَئِنْ أَذَقْنَاهُ نَعْمَةً بَعْدَ ضَرَّاءٍ مَسَّتْهُ لَيَقُولَنَّ ذَهَبَ السَّيِّئَاتُ عَنِّي إِنَّهُ لَفَرِحٌ فَخُورٌ. Man, when he does not hold Iman in our code of life, then his state is such that whatever convenience of life he possesses, if it becomes snatched from him, then for him all possibilities of life become lost in veils of darkness, and he becomes absolutely hopeless from life. This is because for him life is only the name for the comforts of the physical body. And if he gains the means of convenience following this hardship, then he comes to this conclusion that all my problems are resolved, and in this way he becomes puffed up and boasts and brags, as if he has achieved the aim of life. Verses 11, 9 to 10, life is about continuous exploration of our psyche. As we know, the Quran casts a light on various aspects of the human psyche in various verses to apprise Momineen of the pitfalls they need to make themselves aware of. In fact, Momineen need to first identify these within their past self from which they have emerged after getting a new life. The main traits of kufr, shirk, nifaq, qazab, etc. are referred to frequently in the Quran, and it has drawn our attention to their main features for our education and training. It has clearly divided mankind into two categories, Hizbullah and Hizbul Shaitan. These are the two states of the human psyche which need to be understood in detail and should form part of our comprehension of the human psyche as Momineen. These are important things, and we have to keep reminding ourselves. That is why Quran refers to these terms in various verses in order to draw our attention and the context in which such personalities, such psyches work. Here the Quran has alluded to the kind of conduct and behavior of those people who do not consider that human life has a higher purpose. These verses also point to the limitations of man-made systems in which there is intrinsic volatility and capriciousness, and the mentality of every man for himself reigns. Because in a man-made system, there is so much emphasis on wealth accumulation and on the importance of capital, that human beings more or less live a very mechanistic life. So these two verses should be seen with that context in mind. Man-made systems create uncertainty, which leads to feeling of insecurity. And this feeling of insecurity is the one because of which human beings then start accumulating wealth. Under the capitalist system, we see examples of these sharp rises in wealth, steep declines in business, frequent job losses through being laid off. If we see that wherever there are job losses taking place, these will be geared towards making more profit, making industry profitable. And as a result, human beings working in these industries, they just become a cog, just become lifeless human individuals who are just there to help make the rich man more profit. The system is designed, constructed, and managed in such a way that it is meant to benefit the rich and powerful, both individuals and large multinational corporations across the world. If one is religious, and that is where the problem is, that majority, a lot of people, they satisfy themselves by saying that nothing can be done. If one is religious, then we see the display of such a psyche as noted here in these verses. In the West, a form of social welfare system is currently in place. And I said currently because it is under threat as well, which the general public can access in order to be provided with some financial, housing, and other supports and benefits, including the facility to avail aid in seeking employment or in initiating an alternative business. This helps to prevent a total decline into a state of abject poverty. These two verses provide guidelines against a wrong system and are asking us to remove these weaknesses in the human system of sustenance. What Quran is saying over here is that these are the two kinds of mentalities which exist under man-devised systems, and those who are students of the Quran and aiming for Deen should look into it very closely, that what kind of a psyche is created by these systems. Further elaboration. Firstly, the Quran states a factual position that when man suffers a loss in a man-made system, he becomes hopeless, as there is nothing to fall back. And it is a fact. We see that in the societies in which we live. Therefore, we need to create and organize such a system which does not subject human beings to such states of deprivation. So as equal human beings, those of us who are in a better state should look into it and think about it, that how can we eliminate this kind of hopelessness in a society? Because if a society is sum total of hopeless people, then we have problems. We will have a lot of social issues and criminality in that society. This aspect should be considered by those who hold the reins of power. Secondly, the Quran states that if we suffer under such systems, then we somehow recover and regain wealth and power, then we should try to look into the causes of such an unbalanced system and do something about it. A society in which there is no balance and the gap between rich and poor widens is bound to collapse at some point. Thirdly, life is not about taking care of one's own self and not taking care of others. One may gain some temporary joy from material gains, but living in a society which is surrounded by hopelessness and exploitation cannot provide happiness, cannot make man free from fear and grief. So material things don't give that kind of a happiness which come from equality and balance in a society in a collective form. We need to relate these verses to the state of affairs in our world and never think that this is how it is meant to be. And this is where Quran comes in. It says that never mind in what bad or evil state a society is in the world which you find, we have given you a recipe, a formula to overcome that and to counter it. Next verse, 11:11, Momineen follow a different path of life. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُم مَغْفِرَةٌ وَأَجْرٌ كَبِيرٌ. But those people who, having elevated themselves from an animalistic existence, hold a conviction in the human level of life, their state is opposite to this. Whether in a difficult or easy state, in hardship or in comfort, in both states, they live their life on the same one pattern. And they acquire this through their own efforts. It is not that it is God-given. Nothing is God-given. People have to make an effort and remain steadfastly resolute on this program which brings out their potentials and resolves their issues of life. They neither become hopeless by becoming fearful of hardships, nor exceed themselves by becoming boastful about conveniences. Because Quran gives us hope. So that is why Momineen cannot become hopeless. These are those very people for whom there are the means of protection from the destructions of life and the supreme reward which will produce ascendancies and zeal. An alternative to man-made systems. In this verse, the Quran has noted the exceptional conduct of Momineen who, since they understand the man-made systems, they are not affected psychologically, as they know to expect that these systems will inflict harms. Because as students of the Quran, we know that these problems are created because of the wrong system. And if we know the cause, then we can find out the treatment for that, and Quran gives us the treatment as well. However, it is also pointed out that this does not mean that these people accept the status quo, not at all. They don't just sit down and do nothing. They have to make an effort, and this desire to make an effort, motivation for that comes from the Quran. Since they know the recipe for Iman and Saleh deeds, hence they consistently perform those acts and tasks which keep bringing out their latent potentials. Changes in human psyche which help towards establishment of the system of Deen. In fact, bringing out these latent potentials in itself becomes an evidence for them that the system is working. The tangible results may not be visible initially, but the changes which take place within our psyche, those become an evidence that the Quranic recipe is working. This will lead to the provision of protection and security on this path. As a consequence of these efforts of theirs, a great reward awaits them. This also means that it will change the state in which they are to a state possessing power and ascendancy. Further reflections. After describing the human psyche found under man-devised systems in verses 9 to 10, the Quran draws attention to an exception, i.e., those who have brought out the latent potential of sabr through Saleh deeds. What do they achieve through this? Firstly, they never become hopeless. They simply cannot, as they have educated and trained themselves in the light of the Wahi of Allah. So not becoming hopeless because of following the Quranic value system, even as an individual, means that they are bringing out their latent potentials. Secondly, they know that under the system of Deen, there will be no fluctuations of fortunes, as the system will be based on Al-Haqq. There will not only be a balanced distribution of the means of sustenance, there will also be guidance for the development of the human self. The term maghfiratun includes all kinds of protection and security, and Momineen will display this attribute in this system, and which has to be acquired now before the establishment of the system of Deen. Thirdly, the term which appears is wa ajrun kabir, normally translated as supreme reward. In this system, people work to bring out their best, and the reward they get is inbuilt in their efforts. I.e., the system of Deen is organized and managed in such a way that no one person feels exploited, as they know that it is their self which is in need of development. Since such a system becomes free from fear and grief, thus the rewards are multiplied, physical as well as of the self. It also means ascendancy, as this life is lived under the divine laws. Next verse, the Quranic recipe should never be tempered. 11:12. فَلَعَلَّكَ تَارِكٌ بَعْدَ مَا يُوحَى إِلَيْكَ وَزَائِقٌ بِهِ صَدْرُكَ أَنْ يَقُولُوا لَوْلَا أُنْزِلَ عَلَيْهِ كَنْزٌ أَوْ جَاءَ مَعَهُ مَلَكٌ إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ نَذِيرٌ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَكِيلٌ. There is no doubt in this that when it is said to these people that the destruction is about to descend on them, this matter is very distasteful to them, but it cannot happen that in order to please them, you omit those parts of Wahi in which these kinds of warnings appear. It is also true that when these people say that if you are the messenger of Allah, then why are prayers not bestowed upon you, or angels do not walk alongside you? You become affected by these taunts. But since you have been appointed for the duty of Risalat and to give warning, hence all this will need to be tolerated. This responsibility is very hard and this duty is very challenging, but there is no need to become despondent in this. The law of Allah contains within it the full means for the resolution of every matter, hence all will become dealt with ultimately. Great verse. The Quran presents Al-Haqq precisely and assertively with no ambiguity. A number of points are noted in this verse which relate to the human psyche. First, we are told that on this path we will deal with the verses which are very direct and appear to be hard, but we cannot simply omit them or not mention them just because people do not like them or feel uneasy with what is noted in them. For example, punishment of fire, accountability for every deed. Because human beings don't like accountability, that does not mean that we should not mention it. In fact, the more they dislike, the more we should mention it frequently. No intercession accepted. The religious beliefs of forgiveness and mercy do not find any support from the Quran. So what Quran is saying over here is that do not overlook those aspects which are connected with the consequences of wrong deeds of people. Warn them and tell them that this is what Quran says. We don't have to say, I say that. We have to say that this is what Allah has revealed in the Quran. Because if they don't like it, it is the Quran which they don't like. It is not about each one of us. Secondly, since this message is based on rational reasoning, which should appeal to the intellect of those people who pause and reflect, hence those whose criteria for success are related to the possession of wealth and material goods, should not have any impact on our psyche. In fact, after studying the Quran, our own self should acquire this understanding that the issue here is to establish the system of Deen and to relieve mankind from the chains in which they are subjected. I put it down over here, this comment, because sometimes we feel that why should I do it? Because when we see the opposition to the Quranic message, one is bound to be affected. But over here, the Quran says that the aim before you is far bigger, far wider than merely passing on the message to these people. We have to learn from their reaction as well and then produce that kind of ability within us to tolerate it, because that is how we go forward. This demand from anyone about prayers and malaika is the very chain which needs to be addressed after understanding Deen as a system. If Quranic assertions create discomfort in our hearts, then we need to deal with these using its guidance. These should create discomfort because these are breaking our status quo. These are telling us that you are on the wrong path. And when people are on the wrong path and thinking that they are on the right path, if we tell them that your path is wrong and if they were convinced that it is the right path, they are going to react. They are going to feel unhappy. Thirdly, the Quran has guided us that after studying it, we need to become warners and givers of glad tidings, both for our own selves as well as for others in the light of the functioning of the laws of requital and respite. So picking up the courage of passing on the message to others means that we understand it first and we are ready to give and explain the reasons for giving the message to others. Fourthly, Allah has reminded us that do not take those responsibilities which are not yet yours. That is, for example, if people get annoyed with us, then do not get annoyed. So we should not be annoyed and we should be prepared for that I'm not going to be annoyed in the process of passing on this message to others. Here you are acting as only warners, and once this stage passes and more Momineen join with you, then you will figure out what to do next. By stating Wakilun, the Quran has told us that his laws will take care of what these people do, and we should ignore what they say and remain focused on our aim. The Quran recognizes that by acting as warners, there are people who will never feel comfortable with us, and they should not. Their discomfort is a proof that they do not want to hear the message of the Quran, because we will disturb their status quo and remind them about their own accountability. Holding people accountable where they cannot follow those desires which lead to exploiting and creating problems for others is never going to be accepted easily. Let us go to the next verse, 11:13. Allah's book cannot be the product of the human intellect. Am yakulu naftarahu kul fatu bi ashri suwarin mithlihi muftarayatin wad'u man istatatum min dunillahi in kuntum sadiqin. Let us look at the meanings. Are these people impugn that he has invented the Quran himself and he is relating it to Allah just for the sake of it? Say to them, if you are truthful in this claim that this is not the book of Allah but is the proclamation of man, then create 10 surahs just like this Quran and bring them. And leaving Allah aside, whoever you wish to include in this, do so. The matter will become crystal clear. Further reflections on this verse. We have gone through this aspect previously in some detail under verse 1038. There was a complete presentation on this and a number of points were covered over there. Of course, in this verse, the Quran has challenged man to produce one surah, whereas in this verse, under review, it is 10 surahs. Just to reiterate the main points of this challenge of the Quran to mankind for all times, firstly, no one can produce anything like the Quranic verses. Here the challenge is to produce 10 surahs. We should note that it has not asked to produce just one verse anywhere in the Quran. Why? I thought through it and I said, why did Quran not say that you produce one verse? And for example, the verse on law of mukafat, man can never produce that verse because it is the law. But over here, I have tried to put some reflections on that. This is because producing one verse without any context is easy. And we have witnessed in the religious domain how people have given their own meanings in order to mislead by quoting only a single verse, or only part of a verse, without providing the context before or after this quoted verse. Similarly, the whole hadith literature is an attempt to create a parallel version of Wahi, i.e. the Quran. And they even declare it to be mithluhu ma'hu, similar to it, that is, it is like Quran with it. And that is the problem. That is the challenge which Quran is giving us. And it is also at the same time giving us an instruction that you should always look at the verses in the full context in which those verses are revealed. Because pick and choose is not the correct way to understand the Quran. Muslims can never get out of the lagging behind state in which they find themselves unless they come back to the pure Quran. Otherwise, they simply do not and cannot possess that psyche which can help them to change their outer world. Further elaboration, we have witnessed in our study of the Quran so far that it is one interconnected whole, and the addressee of the Quran is the human intellect and I. At a fundamental level, the human intellect can never be aware of something about which it does not have any knowledge. And we can check it. If we don't have a knowledge, we cannot do anything about that information which is available out there, but we do not know. The Quran presents guidance using the immutable permanent values which invite us to examine our deeds and their effects on a very long-term basis. And that is important, because Quran is talking about the continuity of life at human self's level from here to eternity. For example, Quran says, "Wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat ligat," that every self look at what it has sent forward for its tomorrow. And tomorrow over here means every coming day is a tomorrow, and that also means the period or the time which will come after our physical death. So whatever we are doing, the Quran says it has an impact on your tomorrow, your hereafter. A few aspects can simply never be figured out by the human intellect on its own, and for that it needs Wahi. Firstly, the concept of Allah based on divine attributes as noted in the Quran, and the requirement of these attributes for the development of the human self. Secondly, the life of the hereafter exists as a concrete reality, and it's linked to Iman and Saleh deeds. Thirdly, the existence of the human self as an evidence-based reality which revolves around the human I and its consciousness. Fourthly, the existence and functioning of the laws of requital and respite. Even though human beings are aware about cause and effect, they will, however, never accept their own accountability 100%. And that is important. If we look around, people never hold themselves 100% accountable for whatever they do. It is only the students of the Quran who understand this, and then, if they want, they can practice it. Continuing, Fifthly, the permanent values outlined together with their rationales can never be figured out by the human intellect as 100% concrete reality. Even when they figure out something about some of these values, they can never have firm conviction in them without bringing in the law of requital and the reality of the life of the hereafter. The glaring example is fundamental human rights, which somehow human beings have agreed that these are the fundamental human rights. But see how many nations are following it. More or less none. And they have agreed under the Charter of the UNO. And why aren't they following them? Because they know that they can get away with it. They simply cannot get out of the psyche of going for the immediate benefits in this life. Because human mind thinks that the life will end with death, and then they look for immediate benefits in their life, and they think they are not fully accountable for what they do. As long as they can take precautions of any effects against them, then they go on doing wrong. Sixthly, the Quran as a whole presents the system of Deen, and that is the crux where we should be fully focused. And together with this, it lays down the procedure and process of obtaining the aid of Allah, that is through His laws. When we say aid of Allah, does not mean that Allah is directly coming down and going to help it. It is through His laws that He operates. But that is the way we should look into it, and that is the way our psyche should work. When a Momineen emerges and resolves to become the companion of Allah, this system of Deen simply cannot be figured out by the human intellect alone, as this needs highly developed selves which get onto its path voluntarily and acquire that eminence and vision which sees the reality as it is presented by Allah. We have seen that even those people who are fully convinced of the Deen of Allah, they also fail to get enough motivation to pursue this path. So knowing is one thing, and then following it. And for following it, we again need motivation and incentive from the Quran. Illustrating it further, the issue here is not that Allah wishes us to accept the Quran with the belief that it is from Allah and cannot be the product of the human mind, because that is of no use. Because unless we transform that conviction into practical steps, just merely believing or even acquiring Iman into it is meaningless. The aim is to reflect on this point and then to reach this conclusion that the Quran contains the solution for all ailments of the human psyche and to get the best out of our finite life over there. For example, we go to a consultant with a serious ailment and he tells us that this treatment will be 100% in its cure rate if we follow the prescription and continue persevere over a fairly long period of time. I carefully thought through this example and discussed with others as well, and I thought that we should illustrate it with some concrete example from our physical life. To our own research also come to the same conclusion, but still leave it and try other treatments which claim to have a shorter time scale, then who is the loser in this case? And we have seen a lot of people, they give up long-term treatment, which is going to work, but they go for shorter treatment, and as a result, they suffer. Consultant are us. The Quran presents us the solution to deal with the ailment of our physical death and helps to live better a life than the one lived without its guidance. It declares, and we have gone through this verse, Ya ayyuhan nasu qad ja'atkum maw'izatum min rabbikum wa shifaa'un lima fis suduri wa hudan wa rahmatul lil mu'mineen. That is addressing the mankind. Quran says, O mankind, now this guidance, this teaching, this instruction has come to you from your Rabb, that is for the system of Rububiyyat. And in it, shifa, in it is a treatment, lima fis sudur, for your psyche, for your hearts, for your intellect. And it is a guidance and rahmat for Momineen who accept it among mankind. So we have gone through this verse in detail previously. Next verse, 11:14, acquire knowledge of Wahi, understand and accept Iman, and then become a Muslim. فَإِلَّمْ يَسْتَجِيبُوا لَكُمْ فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا أُنزِلَ بِعِلْمِ اللَّهِ وَأَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. But if you're not able to do this, and neither do those people accept this invitation of yours whom you wish to join with you for this purpose, then after that you need to understand that this Quran has been revealed according to the knowledge of Allah. It is not a creation of the messenger himself. And from this, it will also become proven that sovereignty in the whole universe only belongs to Allah. There is no one else associated or included in this. Ask them, do you not submit before this code of Allah even after this? Steps to becoming Muslim. In this verse, Allah then guides us that these people who do not wish to accept the guidance of the Quran and as a consequence result in providing strength to the man-made systems are part of the problem in the human world. I put down this comment that they provide strength to the man-made systems because if I have enough capabilities, enough latent potentials which can help towards the system of Deen and I do not utilize them, then I am in fact unjust to my own self. And as a result, as they say that don't be neutral, I'm contributing to the wrongs in the world. Never be in any doubt about them and do not give them any allowance, otherwise the system of Deen will not emerge. Here we quote another verse, فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَجِيبُوا لَكَ فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّمَا يَتَّبِعُونَ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ وَمَنْ أَضَلُّ مِمَّنِ اتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ بِغَيْرِ هُدًى مِنَ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ. But if they hearken not to you, that is, it is addressed to the messenger of Allah, that when you give them the message and they do not respond, know that they only follow their own lusts. And who is more astray than one who follows his own lusts, devoid of guidance from Allah. So if you follow your own desires, hedonistic desires, then you are creating problems because these are unbridled, unguided. But Allah guides not people given to injustice. This is a very powerful verse when it says, Inna Allah la yahdil qawm az-zalimin, that if we do not come to the Quran, despite knowing about it and do not put in our best, then essentially we are contributing to zulm in the world. We are contributing to injustice in the world. It may not be visible to us directly, but if we look into it and look at our own conduct, we will see that things become worse in the outer world. So that is why it is important that not only to come to the Quran, but then make an effort by coming together. Here the Quran invites us to strengthen our own iman on this path, indicating that merely declaring to have accepted Al-Haqq does not mean that we become static and do not make further efforts. It demands that we continue to make full endeavors so that our conviction in the Quranic guidance becomes part of our psyche, and there is not an iota of shirk in it. Further elaboration, have the conviction that this knowledge has come from Allah, the creator of the heavens and the earth, and that this contains all that through the acquisition of which we will reach that destination which is inherent in the system of rububiyyat. The wording used in the verse is فَعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا أَنزَلَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Know that it is sent down with the knowledge of Allah. We need to pause and reflect here in order to absorb its connotation in relation to ourselves. Then the next part of the verse points to the state of acquiring a new self based on La ilaha illa huwa. No ilah should occupy our psyche except him. Why? What will we get by doing this? Implicit in this statement is, firstly, we were looking for guidance. Our search directed us to the Quran. Secondly, we became dissatisfied with the man-made system and acquired a desire to become companions of Allah. This is a very obvious thought coming to our mind when we look into the Quran and the kind of system it is outlining before us. Then we look around in the world and we compare the two, and of course, it becomes revealed on us that the system around us is not the right one. Thirdly, we began developing ourselves through Saleh deeds, and our latent potentials emerged through our higher understanding, deeds, and interaction in the world. These now serve as evidence that our path is correct. Because unless we know that the results of our efforts are being produced, are being created, we will find it very difficult to stay motivated. Fourthly, we continue to enhance the expanse of our consciousness so that nothing of shirk remains in our minds and hearts. Shirk means that there should be a unity of thought and unity of purpose within the permanent values. Continuing, fifthly, we join those who are also interested and focused on exploring the finer aspects of the system of Deen. They have turned their faces away from all formal belief systems, and this becomes a proof of us being on the right path. and have now seen clearly that the guidance given in the Quran is from Allah and is Al-Haqq. Part of this education and training is to convince ourselves that the laws of Allah do provide help to us, which may not be initially tangibly visible, but just like physical phenomena do materialize in positive outcomes if we continue to make efforts by remaining on this path. Here we should keep reminding ourselves that the principle in Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. That is, Allah will never change the state of a nation until they change their own inner self. The verse then concludes for us that فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, will you not then become a Muslim? So this is a question to the students of the Quran, and the reply coming from the students of the Quran should be, yes, I have become a Muslim. Let's go to the next verse, 11:15. Desires are created to be fulfilled. Man kana yuridul hayat ad-dunya wa zinataha nuwaffi ilayhim amaluhum fiha wa hum fiha la yubkhasun. But if despite this you continue to make your vested interests as the purpose of your life, then you will retain these benefits, because our law is this, that whichever individual desires only the benefits and adornments of physical life, the full results of his efforts are gained in this very world. No diminution of any kind whatsoever is done in these. Momineen are guided about the human desire to acquire immediate benefits of life. So we are getting this guidance that why people pursue their desires for immediate benefits. The world created around us is based on the desires and wishes of those who hold the reins of power in their hands. Here the Quran has directed our attention to this fact that in these man-made systems, if we understand the way this system functions, then we can easily figure out how our desires can be fulfilled. Let us analyze this briefly in a few steps. Firstly, we need to understand the system in which we are living, and then in order to earn a living, we need to do our best according to the opportunities available to us. For example, being a poor child, we will have limited options, whereas being a rich child, we will have relatively more options. And we see that, we experience it, and we witness it. Secondly, we need to recognize our options and then follow the one which appeals to us. If this option conforms to the system, we will benefit and become a beneficiary of the system. For example, if we understand how the stock exchange works, and if we invest in that, we will benefit. Here Allah relates this to himself, that for those who wish to accrue the benefits of this life, we grant them those benefits. And when Quran says we grant them, that does not mean that Allah directly interferes into it. It is only Allah is relating to himself, that this person, through the abilities and potentials given to him within the man-made system, he is making use of them and getting the benefits. Further reflections. Here comes the important part of this statement of the Quran. Do we do all this without casting our mind beyond the system or not? And that is where the importance is of studying the Quran. That how do we relate it to the Quran? Do we question, why do I have more opportunities than a poor child in a village? Or do we just say that this is my luck and Allah wishes me to have these benefits, and since all is dependent on his wish, hence this system is being run by Allah directly. And that is the problem which exists particularly within the religious domain, because people think that it is all coming from Allah, and that is why they don't do anything, because they do not properly and deeply reflect in these verses and relate these to the problems around us. There is an important point here for our deep reflection. If we read this verse in isolation and do not relate it to the previous verses, then we can take any meanings from it which can justify our personal desires. However, if we look at the context of, will you not then become a Muslim, the issue becomes crystal clear. This is the kind of psyche Allah is inviting us to acquire in order to be his companions. If the aim of our life is to obtain the maximum benefits for each one of us, basing it on the assumption that life ends with our physical death, then whatever we acquire will end with our death. This is the focus of this verse. Continuing, an important issue here is that with what aim and intention do we wish to live our life? Here the term al-hayat ad-dunya wa zinataha The physical life in this world, with all its attractions and divide of permanent values, is the focus of our aim in life. This means that we are not looking at our existence from the point of view of the development of the self. Either we are not aware of it, or we are aware of it but choose to ignore it, or are so trapped in the quagmire of poverty that it has become an animalistic existence. The man-made system has forced this on wider humanity. The concluding part of the verse is, "Nuwaffi alayhim amalahum fiha wa hum fiha la yubkhasun." We shall pay their deeds therein without any diminution. However, the question may arise in our minds that all those human beings who are born poor, even if they earnestly desire, they cannot acquire even the basic necessities of life. Then how can Allah here declare that they get what they work for? However, if we relate it to the question, will you not then become a Muslim? Then it becomes clear that Allah is asking us to create a system of Deen by becoming a Muslim in which people can receive in direct proportion to their efforts, even if it is with the intention of having nothing in the hereafter. Because in the present, that is fine, because in the present world, people have not been given a clear message based on the rationale of human existence and the presence of human self that there is a life beyond death. And unless we create a system which takes that fact into account, we can never have a balanced distribution of means of sustenance. It is their choice. However, this is not possible even in the man-made system, at least in today's world. Last verse for today's presentation, 11:16, despite efforts, letting deeds go waste. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ لَيْسَ لَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ إِلَّا النَّارُ وَحَبِطَ مَا صَنَعُوا فِيهَا وَبَاطِلٌ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. But these people have no share in the bounties of the future, that is the life of the hereafter. Whatever they earn in this world, all that goes to waste in the hereafter, and all their deeds and work become squandered. There will be such a destruction and devastation for them over there that it will burn everything and leave it as a heap of ashes. This comment, we should keep it in mind. It is in relation to the importance of the existence at self's level. Because if the self has enough potentials and has got that kind of an ability to go on living for eternity, then if it is not given that opportunity, then it goes wasted. Life lived without developing the self is worthless. Here the Quran has noted the consequence of ignoring the need for the development of the self and has made it clear that if we think that our life is only this physical one, then we are essentially not holding ourselves accountable for what we do in this life. A big chunk of our life goes missing and we live at a having mode, as Eric Fromm says. So we don't rise to the being mode, and then of course the next stage is the Quranic mode. We come across questions like this, that what about those who do a lot of good, for example, charity work, send aid to other countries, etc., but do not have Iman in the Quranic system of Deen? Will their deeds bear any results? Will Allah put them into the fire? The issue over here is that Allah does not put anyone into the fire. Human beings put their own self into fire through their own deeds. Such questions can only be answered by acquiring understanding of the issue of the presence of the human self and its development within the context of Iman and Saleh deeds. The Quran places absolute emphasis on the aim, intention, and motive behind every deed of ours. Whatever we do in life has an impact on our psyche and the outer world. For example, both physical and non-physical in terms of interacting with other human beings. The issue here is that are we fully conscious of all this happening through our thoughts and deeds or not? We have seen by going through these various verses and surahs that Quran is putting all emphasis to expand the horizon of our consciousness and to understand that this life of ours at self level is going to go beyond that. And secondly, the system of Deen is placed within our reach if we follow the process and procedure given in the Quran. Further reflections. Here the Quran has noted in a factual style that they will have nothing in the hereafter, but what about those who do not have Iman in the hereafter? What is the point in informing them? And that question also comes in our mind, that What about those if they have not been informed, or even if they have been informed but are not willing to listen to it? This is for us, i.e., the students of the system of Deen. If we look at it from this perspective, that the life of the hereafter exists, then how do we make it effectively part of our psyche so that we can benefit during this life? How will this enhance our understanding of the Quran and help us in the establishment of Deen? These points need a lot of deep reflection individually, because we have to look at it that I use an analogy that if I have headache and paracetamol is available, but I do not take because I do not want to take it, then my headache is not going to go away. So if I complain about my headache and not take paracetamol, that means responsibility really lies with me. But if I do not know whether paracetamol exists or not, then I'll have to live with that headache and hope that it will disappear at its own. Part of this means coming to terms with the psychological impacts of the man-device system. We have already gone through the effects of accumulation of wealth and the absence of a higher purpose of life in our way of life and competition in gaining material successes. This leads to forgetting and neglecting the needs of ourself and only focusing on the physical self and its needs. This creates an imbalance in the world and consequently creates a world full of fear and grief. Why deeds go wasted? In the next part of the verse, it is said that Wahabita ma sana'u. Habita means goes wasted, sana'u, whatever they were concocting, whatever they were doing or inventing during the course of their living. Whatever they are inventing has no intrinsic value in the divine scale, and it adds no value to the human self in relation to the continuity of life beyond the physical existence. Here we need to look around the world and see what is being practiced, how much value it has in terms of the development of the human self. Because the issue before us is that the Quran is giving that procedure and process through which we can develop ourselves. If we do not follow that, how are we going to develop it? And we have seen it that no one can produce anything like the Quran. So these are the things with which we have to convince ourselves by studying the Quran. Without studying the Quran, of course, we can never ever have the knowledge in the first place. And if we don't have knowledge of that, how can we convince ourselves? Over here, I've quoted few verses from Surah Qaf. And the black one is first and the red and the blue one. قُلْ هَلْ نُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِالْأَخْسَرِينَ عَمَلًا الَّذِينَ ضَلَّ سَعْيُهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسِنُونَ صُنْعًا أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ وَلِقَائِهِ فَحَبِطَتْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ فَلَا نُقِيمُ لَهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَزْنًا. We see the same words are used over here are habitat and sun'a. Say, shall we tell you of those who lose the most in respect of their deeds, those whose efforts have been wasted in this life while they thought they were acquiring good by their works? They are those who do kufr to the signs of their Rabb. And they are the ones when we say kufr. Kufr is a very powerful term of the Quran, which includes everything, denial, rejection, covering up, and even misguiding themselves and opposing haqq. So all these things come under kufr. And the fact of accountability, vain will be their works, nor shall we on the day of judgment raise the balance to weigh their deeds. Because there will be no deeds, there will be nothing to weigh. We only do weighing of something when there is something available. When there is nothing available, then we cannot do anything about it. So if the self is not developed, there's nothing in that self, then there is nothing for that in the hereafter, because it will not fit into the system of being of the hereafter. To conclude the verse, we need to develop the ability and have the knowledge to recognize the batil system in all details around us. When we say batil, we have gone through it before as well. Batil means all those efforts which do not produce positive results in relation to the human life. If, for example, our efforts over here should help us to develop ourselves, and if our efforts do not help us to develop ourselves, then it becomes batil. Even if we are its beneficiaries, all messengers initially worked under the batil system. That is why the Wahi of Allah was sent to them in order to guide mankind out of a state of fear and grief. Our success is in direct proportion to the intensity of our desire to succeed and to get out of this battle system. Here we need to remain conscious of this, that Allah is not making us fearful about these issues affecting our life, but is helping us to come to grips with the importance of our creation and the continuation of our life beyond the physical part of our existence. So aim is not to create fear, aim is to make us realize that our life is important. And since we have landed up in this world, we have to make our choices and this decision making in such a way that we should get the maximum benefits. And this is where the Quran helps us. Fear is kept within us so that we can employ it to avoid the pitfalls in our life, and this fear gets removed with passage of time. Fear is becoming conscious of something which has an impact on us. And if we know something which is unknown, and once it becomes known, then fear disappears. Whereas man-made systems aim at creating state of continuous fear in order to curtail our potentials. In fact, people who are rich and powerful, they deliberately create fear to subjugate human beings, to make them do what they wish them to do. Allah's way is meant to make us aware of our psychological makeup, its latent potentials, and then to become totally free from all kinds of fears, as noted, for example, in verse 238. We are endowed with an extremely comprehensive cognitive makeup so that we can employ it to its optimum using the Quran. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of belief.